Bonjour. Le micro, on va commencer notre session. Alors, bonjour à tous et à toutes. Bienvenue à la première midi-rencontre de surexposition présentée par le laboratoire Mimesis en collaboration avec Hexagramme. Cette rencontre et les deux autres à venir, le 27 mai et le 10 juin, sont bilingues. On va accueillir des présentateurs francophones et anglophones. Surexposition invite des créatrices, des chercheurs, des créateurs, des experts, des étudiantes à présenter des travaux et des initiatives portant sur les modalités de création, de diffusion, exposition et médiation artistique par les nouveaux espaces virtuels et immersifs. Face à la distanciation physique, sociale imposée au long de cette dernière année, les processus de travail et les stratégies de diffusion des créateurs ont dû être pensés, parfois improvisés. Les conditions matérielles et immatérielles de production et d'exposition, ainsi que l'urgence d'acquérir des nouvelles compétences, ont précipité des apprentissages, des collaborations davantage distribuées et des modalités de monstration inédites. Donc, bien que la création numérique soit déjà ancrée dans l'écosystème de l'art, de la culture et des industries créatives montréalaises, le cadre de ces créations est encore une fois interrogé. Donc, lors de ces 3 midi-rencontres, nous nous intéresserons aux objets qui ont émergé dans ce contexte, à des créations ne correspondant plus à un seul genre, à une discipline, à un espace ou à un type d'institution ou un public désigné. Nous discuterons donc d'interprétation numérique, virtuelle et en ligne, de projets préexistants ou de nouvelles modalités d'expérience de la création par le numérique. Les séances donc sont ouvertes à tous et s'adressent aux organismes, aux communautés de praticiens et de chercheurs. Elles sont diffusées live sur YouTube. Et notre midi rencontre aujourd'hui, elle porte sur la création. Et je suis accompagnée de Louis-Philippe Rondeau, artiste et professeur au NAD. Et nous allons accueillir comme expert invité et premier intervenant Daniel Iregui, que je vais laisser Louis-Philippe introduire. Juste vous dire aussi que les prochaines midi-rencontres sont donc le 27 mai sur la diffusion avec l'expert invité Alain Thibault et le 10 juin portant sur l'exposition au Centre avec comme invité Myriam Achard et Daniel Fizet du Centre Phi. Merci.
Donc, merci Manuel. Donc, j'aimerais commencer par présenter Daniel Iregui. Daniel Iregui est un artiste numérique qui crée des sculptures interactives, des espaces et des interventions architecturales en utilisant la technologie comme outil et comme esthétique. Il travaille autour des combinaisons infinies et aléatoires produites lorsqu'un système audiovisuel est ouvert à être transformé par le public. En 2010, Daniel a fondé Irrégular, un studio de création de contenu interactif où il produit ses œuvres et des commandes commerciales. Il est né à Bogota, en Colombie, en 1981 et vit et travaille actuellement à Montréal. Et d'ailleurs, je dois souligner que, étant donné que des rencontres sont bilingues, Daniel va présenter en anglais. Donc, je cède la parole à Daniel.
Thank you very much. I'm going to start sharing my screen right away. So thank you for the invitation. I love these opportunities to talk about my work. There's a lot of things that happen in the production, the creation of these type of things. The work on their own, most of the time they cannot express them. So thank you for the opportunity. And today I'm going to be talking to you about a project called Antibodies. And I call the presentation From Lockdown to Public Space because I would like to tell you a little bit how this project went. And it was, of course, it started in lockdown. And then we were able to take it to where normally we produce our work, which is public space. So I'll tell you the story of that. And with this, I'll be able to share about the creation of the project and the concept, etc. So that being said, let me just introduce a bit, extend your introduction. My name is Daniel Iregui. I'm a new media artist and creative director at Irregular. And basically, I became an artist here in Montreal. I came almost probably, last time I counted was like 17 years ago type of thing. As a designer, I had the skills to do web. At the time, there was a lot of Flash, so these websites that were like full of interaction and many things. But I was at the time doing a lot of experiential websites, and that was my type of thing. And I started to get away from all the commercial and all these typical websites. And in that time, around 12 years ago, I was hired by Moment Factory to do websites. But at the time, I saw them working on interactive experiences in public space that I was already interested on, but I just didn't saw this. I saw for the first time that was a work, like a job type of thing. So I became very interested and decided to found my studio called Irregular that was focused on this. So at the same time, when I founded that, Cartier Spectacle started to open their permanent installation sites. So there was a good opportunity for this type of work to be presented. So I think it's sort of, I accidentally became an artist because I just had it, as I was starting, there was many opportunities to create public space work. I had the skills because I was, already working on a website. So with this, I've been dedicating all my work and all my time on creating interactive installations in public space, where I really work, sort of co-author the projects with the audience, where I put my unfinished work in public spaces and I let people with their interaction complete them. So let me start by showing you a reel of 10 years of work. We're gonna see outdoor work, which is my focus, a bit of immersive spaces as well, and at the end, scenographies, which is, I would say it's a great playground for me to explore large-scale structures. So let's start by this, and we'll move next into antibodies. Okay, so antibodies. Before I jump in, I want to just recap a bit on what you just saw. My work is, my focus is on interaction. So why I'm interested in interaction? I'm really interested on random systems. Sort of, I think it's sort of, I don't want to commit to a finished project. I want to leave it there, and create a random system that sort of it's never the same. When you add the interaction of people, it's even more random. So I love this idea of creating things that they're not done. They're just very different all the time. And public space is an amazing place to create these dynamics because people are normally not used to see my type of work there. So it's interesting to sort of break this dynamics of public space and have be able to attract people, and then once you attract them, have them interact. Once they interact, have them engage enough time so they can get something out of it. So I'm interested on all this process, all this process of bringing people to interact, and then everything that happens during the interaction is very interesting. How people really engage, how the meaning and the concept of my projects are revealed through that interaction. So you You should read my projects as the person interacting with the object and not just the object itself. And I also like to make people acknowledge each other, hopefully connect to each other, and acknowledge the people around you. So public space is great for this. It's it's hard to achieve, so it's a great challenge. Indoor spaces is normally galleries, museums. People are there already expecting something, so you can ask more of them. I think that it's a bit what Antibodies is. Antibodies is it's an interactive piece that actually was born from as a website because La Maison de la Culture on SIC had invited us to do a solo show in their gallery in June last year. And of course, probably by May, they decided, they told us we'll need to cancel the show. There's this pandemic in the world, so but we can keep the budget for the exhibition for you to create something online. And I think they were expecting sort of a virtual exhibition of the works we were going to present, which it didn't make any sense for me. Physicality and presence is very important part. I can videos of the work wouldn't do. So I decided to create a web piece, and then that's where Antibodies comes from. Actually, well, I'll just introduce a bit this slide. So when we were brainstorming with my studio, and right now my studio, we're around 8 people between full-time sort of teams or collaborators, but I love to bounce ideas with everyone. And we were when we were thinking about what to do, we were forced to do it on a Zoom meeting. And right now, I think we're very used to it. But at that time, it was the time around May that we were realizing that was the new life, and it was very hard to know when that new life will change. So we were all remotely with the hair like that. That's my hair, and sort of trying to realize and trying to work and be efficient. And brainstorming, what can we say? I think we should, comment on what's happening right now. And then we quickly realized that, these Zoom meetings and this, this new social gatherings, it's something that we could create something about. So we decided to create Antibodies, which basically is about this. It's we wanted to create sort of this idea of a video conference that will invite people to just log in, and we will use this is not looping. We will use face tracking on the browser to overlay these types of patterns on people's faces, and the idea was to have people do face gestures. So this sort of people, without realizing why we're there, the patterns do react to whatever face you're doing, and that was sort of the first part. So there was 2 chapters, you and them. So the second part, and actually here's me sort of showing what people will do, and sort of we wanted, and this idea of the faces was, when you're talking right now, we're very used to it, but at the time you will see everybody, and most of them are not really paying attention. It's like a gallery of sort of, disembodied beings that are sort of there, but they're not there. And they're trying to do faces to assure you you're there, or maybe they forgot and they're just living their life. So it was this idea, and we added a bit of sort of graphics to just have people a bit more expressive on their gestures. So this is me with my hand, just so I can show you how the background reacts. Basically, we're just tiling in different ways the main image, and just to sort of have a bit of a choreography in that sense. Now, 2 chapters. So you will go into you, and then when you decide to go into them, you realize that we've been recording you all the time, and all the faces that you did are now part of this gallery, infinite gallery of everybody that has participated in the past. And for us, that was sort of the main goal. You were now being part of a space where people are, you don't know if they're there or not. They're all doing like these very strange faces that are, not normal, that were they don't follow the patterns anymore, because now we put different patterns depending on the pattern, on the visual rendering that we're creating right now. And that's basically the end of the experience. It was initially a web base, so we deployed this by June, and people were from around the world. I think last time we checked, there was 28 countries, people that went there to check. It was very relevant at the time, and it was great to see how this evolved, and it started to give us some reading of how people's intimacy in these lockdowns were. So you see crazy hairs. Sometimes you see in this screenshot, actually, you will see the beginning of people using masks, which at the time was rare, but you see somebody there with masks. So it was very interesting, almost to go periodically and see what was happening with the world. Now, actually, this website is currently running. You can go and check it out anytime, and now we've been promoting it a lot, and we've been presenting in many countries now. So you're gonna see there's it gives you an idea of the world. It's very nice to go and check it out from time to time. I do it, but anyway, once we in October, once we actually no, in September, there was this idea of, okay, maybe the lockdowns are done, so we should turn this piece into a public space, because this is what we normally do. We love the project, and we normally are not working on websites. And to do that, actually, in parallel, like the work that we're doing with the studio right now, it's around Cursor, which I want to tell you about it a little bit, which is it's a long-range interactive system for large media facades. So we got a great grant from the CMF, and we've been supported by the Quartier Spectacle and Investissement Quebec to create this software that basically allows us to turn very big buildings into interactive installations. And we wanted to do something very simple. Use a very small camera, place it very far away so people cannot see it, look at crowds, and be able to extract as much data as possible. So, for example, their hands, their face, or their body. All of this using artificial intelligence. So just with the image, we're able to extract this. At the time, we were working on the phase one, and antibodies is phase. That's why also the reason that we wanted to explore this with antibodies. So by using Cursor, we could take the website content and all the logic, take Cursor and create this idea of a large-scale interactive installation for buildings. So we had this idea, and of course, there's always, from an idea to making it happen, it's always the push is always having the opportunity to present it. But we in Montreal, I feel we're super lucky that there's people that take risks and believe on projects that are not done yet. And one of those people is Electra and the Biennale. And Alain Thibault, he liked the project, the website, and he gave us the opportunity to present it in his Electra festival that was going to happen in October in L'Arsenal. What you're looking at right now is we were at L'Arsenal October 1st. It's sort of working. You still see the camera in the floor, but we were happy. It was gonna be, we were gonna launch it. We're gonna premiere it. And of course, by the afternoon of October 1st is again when we went into red zone, red alert. I don't know how you call it. So it didn't. We couldn't present it. We couldn't move it forward. We couldn't see people interacting. We later realized when we picked up the computers that there was a lot of people that did sort of walking tours when we were not there, and people got to see it. So at the time, it was just one of those sort of things. You work a lot, very hard on something, and it sort of it was canceled, unfortunately. But by November, we had another opportunity in Dubai, which was it was a bit more open at the time. We decided to go and sort of a bit counter current travel, see how people reacted, and it went great. So I would like to show you a documentation of this presentation in Dubai, which is not like this one. It's outdoor, so we're using LED screens, but you're gonna get a sense. It's a 1-minute video. So yeah, so basically what this project, how it was presented, it was day and night. So we had this spotlight that you see in the middle. The idea was really, we started to see how Cursor, this technology that we were creating, was actually working. We were able to have a space without technical sensors, cables everywhere, and we were able to really track people in detail. So in the day, you see it a bit more in the middle. You can see there's a little tiny thing there besides the light, and that's actually the camera. It's very, very little. But at night, in the left, you see, we don't see it. It's invisible. So this is the goal. It's really to create interactive experiences that where you don't see the technicalities. You're not, of course, people do look for sensors. They're curious about how things are working, but it just happens. You stand somewhere and then you see yourself, you're interacting, you're influencing the work, and you're not sort of having to be in front of a sensor, of a camera. So that was the idea. So it was great to see this project working in Dubai, and there was so many types of people there, and I think that's actually, I have a sequence of videos here. There was a bit of a lineup at some point. People liked the project a lot. It's so nice to create projects, and I think that's one of the things that I've learned with years about interactive installations is this the power they have. They really attract people. People get it, and there's so many layers of I think what do you call that, of things that you can get out of a project like this. Of course, the girl in the right, she's very happy. She's seen herself. There's graphics in her face. She's having a lot of fun. So, and that's okay. That first layer of sort of being able to interact and realize that you're interacting. That first layer is super important, and some people just get that out of our projects, and that's completely okay. Now, there's other layers on why we are doing the work that we're doing, why today, who are we, what are we trying to ask about projects like that. And those are for audiences that are, more curious, that are sort of, they know that, or they can sense that there's more depth into the work that we present. So you can go deeper, and then you can question other things on privacy and technology and other things. You can go very deep. So for me, the first layer is as important as the last one, but the idea is really to be able to have have the people have the full journey as much as possible. Last slide, I just wanted to share a bit where this project has been, just to show a bit this idea of hybrid projects, which is something, it's not new for us, but it became sort of a requirement for the world to be able to present artworks at this time. And because we had this website or the interactive installations, depending on the country and the context, we were able to present either or sometimes both. So it's been twice actually 3 times in the States, Dubai Design Week, twice in Korea. In Electro, I put it there, it was postponed, so I think hopefully it's going to happen eventually. And the first, and actually the people that commissioned the work, which is the Maison de la Cultura Onsic, counted as the seed for the project. So that's it. That's antibodies, and I would love to hear your questions. That's all I wanted to share with you today.
Thank you, Daniel. That was really interesting. By the way, I'd like to remind the people who are listening right now that you can ask questions in the comments, in the YouTube comments. So we're monitoring those for questions. In the meantime, Daniel, I've got a few questions myself. I've been lucky enough to see antibodies, and
yourself.
Yes, well, actually, we haven't met officially, but I was with you at Arsenal, and I was also in the exhibit that was canceled.
No way!
Yes, yes.
Amazing.
So I feel your pain, definitely. So, the question I have is, do you consider your work, Antibodies, as a means of refuting the notion that physical human interaction can be replaced by technology? Can technology become, do you think technology can become a proxy for intimacy and increased physical space? You know, and in the context of the COVID pandemic, do you think that the antibodies is a means of saying that, you know, Zoom and Meet and all those technologies are not good surrogates for a physical presence?
Yeah. I think there's a lot of that for me. The whole feeling of sort of the fact that we are having a talk and I'm not there. It's very efficient. We can do it. I was sort of on something 5 minutes ago. I'm gonna do the talk, do something else. It's very efficiency goes very up, very high. But all the humanity and all of the all other things are completely disappear. So there's this, it's very strange for me how we are able to do many things. You're able to go around the world and meet a lot of people and do things, but it's very empty at the end. You are exhausted, there's no human connection. There's also this feeling of you don't really know if people are paying attention or not. So I think definitely it's the piece makes that question. And this gallery of people, it's funny. You know, you see people doing funny faces, and sometimes you see a friend or something, so you're like, wow, it's a sort of a fun aspect. But if you look more, it starts to become sad. It reminds you of our current life. This is what life is today. So I think that definitely. We wanted to sort of remind you of that feeling of it's just it's empty. It's not there's a human aspect that it's missing. Nevertheless, you can do it and you can still function. So I think there's efficiency versus I don't know, humanity, or there's something there.
Interesting. I agree, and I believe that Manuel has a question for you on the chat.
There's a question here on the chat that is perhaps more on the technical side, but I think it does relate with what you were saying of these the multiple faces on the screen that just appear and disappear a bit randomly, and you can't really gauge the interest of people depending on how many people are there. And so there's a Laurita that was asking, how is this the small screens that we see around the center image of the person that is doing the facial expressions? There's the amount of faces around her vary. Is that automatically determined, or is that linked to the amount of users before or after?
Oh yeah, no, good question. No, actually, no, it's completely random. Normally, the way that I like to create these systems, these graphical systems, is create rules and then randomize between them. So there's a certain pattern of rows and columns, maximum rows, maximum columns, minimum as well. And then there was this idea of patterns of how you will reflect them. So those are there as rules. And then internally, we're just like changing completely random. This is we give weights to the decisions, but in this case, it was completely out of our control.
I've got another question. Is your work related in any way to a form of criticism of ambient surveillance? Is there a surveillance aspect? Do people feel that the camera is spying on them when they're interacting with antibodies?
Yeah. I wouldn't say criticism, because I don't really feel like doing that, but definitely I do like to show what technology is able to do. So right now, you are there in a public space, and the computer is able to understand exactly your face expressions, and so it's a bit. If you're thinking about privacy and surveillance, we're showing you what probably it's also happening from in other parts, but you just do not know. So I think it's a bit of a, hey, this happens. Computers can already do that. So more than criticism is just to inform you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, perfect. So thank you very much, Danielle. I think we can introduce our next participant. Actually, it's two participants, Stacy Kahn and Jessia Stewart. So Stacy Kahn is a PhD student in art education at Concordia University. She is a multidisciplinary artist and writer, and holds a BFA from Alberta College of Art and Design and an MA in art education from Concordia University. She writes about contemporary art with a particular focus on artist-run culture, performative practices, and new materiality. And the second participant in this talk is Jessia Stewart. She holds bachelor's degrees in fine art from the Alberta College of Art and Design and Computer Science from the Université de Montréal. Stewart is the coordinator of an academic makerspace. Her visual art practice is highly varied, including drawing, algorithms, collage, coding, electronics, virtual reality, and machine learning. So I'd like to welcome you, Stacy and Jessia.
Merci. Une seconde, je vais juste... On avait prévu de présenter en français, juste pour prévoir tout le monde. On a fait le choix, donc on y va en français. Je pense qu'on n'avait pas pensé que nos bios étaient écrits en anglais, c'est logique, mais quelque chose qu'on n'avait pas prévu dans la préparation. Bon, Stacy, est-ce que... Oui, on peut commencer. Alors, je ne vais pas m'introduire parce qu'on a déjà fait, mais je vais parler un peu à propos de nos projets. C'est quoi le projet Unmaterial? C'est une expérience de réalité virtuelle dans laquelle on explore un terrain et interagit avec certains objets qui modifient le terrain. Alors, ce projet était conçu comme un projet de recherche qui demande comment les collaborateurs apprennent les nouvelles compétences. On a décidé de créer un projet réalité virtuelle parce qu'on voulait créer un projet accessible durant COVID. Et en plus, les projets numériques sont à l'intersection de nos intérêts artistiques et professionnels. Donc, pourquoi est-ce qu'on a choisi de créer quelque chose en Google Cardboard ou en réalité virtuelle et A-Frame? Pour moi, c'était vraiment un moment un peu
bon, on est pris beaucoup chez nous. C'est le fun d'avoir accès à un espace virtuel. Mais avant, tous les essais que j'ai faits pour créer en réalité virtuelle, c'était long, c'était cher, c'était difficile. Mais enfin, on a trouvé une solution un peu A-Frame qui est un library JavaScript. C'est vraiment pas cher, c'est rapide, c'est facile à vraiment mettre en œuvre une petite scène. On n'a pas besoin de mettre toute notre énergie dans le côté technique. On peut vraiment jouer, puis créer, puis avoir du fun. Si jamais quelqu'un veut voir sur le site A-Frame, leur Hello World est vraiment cool. Là. Déjà, c'est comme la première chose que tu écris dans le code. Tu as des objets, des vrais objets que tu peux regarder en réalité virtuelle. Pour ceux qui ne le connaissent pas, Google Cardboard, c'est la version pas mal la plus simple de réalité virtuelle. C'est pas la meilleure, mais c'est tellement accessible. Si tu as déjà acheté un cellulaire, boum, tu as accès à la réalité virtuelle et c'est quelque chose qui est vraiment le fun. Mon travail dans le Makerspace me poussait déjà dans cette direction, mais dans le moment de COVID, où là, on a plein de questions de transmission, est-ce qu'on va partager de l'équipement? Est-ce que c'est sécuritaire? On est tous chez nous. Donc, le Cardboard nous laissait vraiment l'opportunité de créer en réalité virtuelle et de le partager chez nous sans trop de stress. C'est aussi un bon moment. On a commencé à trouver plein de ressources. C'était le fun de l'apprendre. Nous, chez Concordia, on a un service gratuit de Udemy. Donc, j'ai trouvé un cours, c'est quelques heures, puis ça explique tout vraiment étape par étape. Je pense si quelqu'un veut, je peux partager le lien plus tard. Donc, c'était vraiment facile à commencer. Il y a beaucoup de documentation. A-Frame aussi, tout est bien expliqué. C'est facile. Ça n'a jamais été aussi facile, d'après moi, de partager ces petites expériences en réalité virtuelle. Pas besoin de passer des heures à lire des longs bouts de code. C'est vraiment rapide. Puis là, après, pour aller plus loin, oui, c'est vrai, il faut aller des fois sur GitHub, sur des forums. Mais en tant qu'expérience création d'art numérique, j'ai trouvé ça extrêmement plaisant. Puis on a pu vraiment mettre beaucoup d'énergie dans la création de l'œuvre elle-même.
Oui, on voulait utiliser des techniques de collage. Alors, on a utilisé les textures et les objets trois-dimensionnels qui étaient déjà là sur l'Internet qu'on peut utiliser pour les projets non commerciaux. Alors, pour ça, on a utilisé textures.com et Thingiverse. Alors, ça nous laisse penser tout à fait au concept et pas à trouver les textures ou prendre les photos. Moi, je suis vraiment intéressée à comment on utilise les matériaux dans les projets conceptuels et dans les milieux numériques. C'est quoi vraiment le matériau dans ce projet? Est-ce que c'est le code, les objets dans le monde numérique ou les matériaux qu'ils réfèrent? Ces matériaux causent des différents rapports avec l'audience et peuvent affecter leur expérience de réalité virtuelle. Et c'est les tensions avec les différents modes d'apercevoir ce projet que moi, je suis vraiment intéressée à.
Cool. Moi aussi, je partage beaucoup des intérêts de Stacy, mais principalement aussi, j'ai eu beaucoup de plaisir à jouer avec ce projet, à faire un premier projet en réalité virtuelle. Je trouve qu'il y a une belle tension entre ce qui est réaliste, certaines photos, certaines textures, c'est vraiment réel, mais l'effet total est un peu un échec, peut-être un échec, mais c'est pas une illusion totale. Il y a un côté immersif, mais c'est pas non plus croyable. On n'est pas dans un vrai monde. On voit, il y a des fois le mouvement, c'est pas réaliste. C'est un monde qui bouge un peu, mais pas complètement. Pour moi, j'ai posé plus de questions qu'avoir des réponses concrètes. Il y a un petit élément aussi. Moi, je ne suis pas gamer, mais je trouve qu'il y a vraiment un côté de jeu vidéo dans la réalité virtuelle. On ne s'échappe jamais. Il y a une question, est-ce que je suis dans un jeu? Est-ce que je quête pour quelque chose? Est-ce que je comprends bien le jeu aussi? Donc, je ne sais pas si c'est frustrant, est-ce que c'est plaisant, est-ce qu'on aime ça ou est-ce qu'on peut aller au-delà du côté jeu vidéo? Je trouve aussi que la réalité virtuelle, un peu à part du reste du web, il y a moins de normes. Sur un site web, on a une idée que telle chose est cliquable, telle chose on peut voir d'une certaine manière, on va interagir de manière X, Y ou Z. En réalité virtuelle, c'est plus compliqué, ce qui nous donne une belle liberté, mais aussi c'est difficile pour amener l'usager à avoir des interactions pour créer quelque chose d'intéressant. Donc, bon, j'ai encore plus de questions. Et qu'est-ce que, dans la réformulation du monde, dans la réalité virtuelle, est-ce qu'il y a des éléments qu'on ramène de l'expérience virtuelle, qu'on ramène dans le monde réel après? Bon, j'ai pas des réponses claires. Je pense que je vais le laisser là pour pas trop parler sur le sujet.
Oui, un des problèmes qu'on a trouvé, c'est le défi d'une gaze-based interaction, une différence entre le Google Cardboard et les casques. Les autres casques, c'est que on peut seulement bouger par utiliser le gaze. Alors, on voit sur le projet, on doit regarder les objets pour bouger. On ne peut pas bouger n'importe où. Mais on continue de travailler sur ce projet pour ajouter des nouveaux éléments. Un des éléments qu'on ajoute, c'est le son. Et aussi, on va travailler sur trouver les différents types de locomotion dans la scène. On a aussi intéressé à comment on peut adapter l'expérience pour le browser, le Google Cardboard et des autres casques de réalité virtuelle. L'introduction des éléments sonores et l'extension du paysage virtuel sont les projets à lesquels on travaille à ce moment. Et...
Oui, je pense, j'espère que vous avez plein de questions pour nous, mais sinon, je ne sais pas si on va pouvoir avoir des réponses des gens qui regardent sur YouTube, mais ça nous intéressait de savoir si les gens trouvaient qu'il y avait un élément de jeu vidéo, un élément de quête dans cette expérience. Moi, je m'intéresse à ce que les gens le trouvent plus réaliste ou plus du côté surréaliste. Puis finalement aussi, qu'est-ce que vous pensez? Pour nous, il y avait des questions, on travaille avec les matériels virtuels. Les matériels, est-ce que c'est le code ou est-ce que c'est les textures, les couleurs, les formes? Donc, je suis intéressée à avoir les opinions de tout le monde là-dessus ou de répondre à d'autres questions.
Merci beaucoup. Très intéressant. Personnellement, moi, j'aurais une première question. Ce serait, dans votre description, vous parlez de virtually material objects, donc des objets qui seraient à la fois virtuels et matériels. Puis, ce que je trouve intéressant dans votre démarche, c'est que ça remet en question l'idée même de ce qui est la matérialité. Est-ce que, selon vous, la matérialité, c'est vraiment des objets physiques? Est-ce que ça inclut des objets virtuels? Ou est-ce que ça inclut même le code qui définit ces objets virtuels-là?
Stacy, est-ce que tu veux... Mais je pense que c'est une question qu'on pose, puis on repose, puis on essaie un peu, peut-être pas de répondre, mais d'explorer. On voulait savoir, c'est un peu les thèmes qu'on interagisse avec différents objets. Est-ce qu'on peut créer une matérialité dans un espace virtuel? Est-ce que dans le cas où, genre, par exemple, il y a un des objets, tout devient en vitre, tout est cassé, tout est cassante. Est-ce qu'il y a une expérience, mais est-ce que ça amène juste la similitude de la monde non virtuel ou est-ce qu'il y a une autre version virtuelle qui existe? Ou est-ce que en virtuel, c'est juste la code? Moi, je pense qu'il y a toujours un côté ramené par le code, ramené par la logique virtuelle. Pour moi, ça reste omniprésent et c'est inéchappable. Mais je pense qu'il y a des belles choses et plus qu'on le pousse, plus qu'on joue avec, peut-être qu'on peut avoir d'autres réponses à cette question.
Oui, et pour moi, je pense que aussi il y a toujours le code, mais aussi il y a toujours, on fait toujours les connexions entre la vie réelle et la vie virtuelle. Alors, nos expériences d'une texture dans le vrai monde, ça affecte nos expériences des textures, des matériaux dans le monde virtuel. Alors, il y a toujours des interconnexions entre les différents types de matériaux.
J'ai une follow-up question. Vous avez mentionné que vous puisez beaucoup dans le freeware, dans les bases de données de texture ou de formes auxquelles vous aviez accès, et même Google Cardboard qui est quand même facilement accessible. Dans le développement du son, est-ce que vous allez continuer à utiliser cette approche qui après devient aussi une esthétique en elle-même très caractéristique de ce que vous nous avez montré? Et aussi cette approche de type collage qui est aussi très, très présente dans l'environnement et dans le virtual world que vous avez créé.
Peut-être que je peux commencer par dire que oui, on continue dans la même idée. Il y a beaucoup de banques sonores gratuites sur Internet et on avait déjà commencé de travailler, de sélectionner les sons qui fitaient avec nos matériels. Moi, dans mon autre pratique, je travaille plus avec du collage traditionnel. J'avais toujours l'obsession que tout doit m'appartenir. Je prenais toutes mes propres photos, je copiais mes propres photos. C'était toutes des choses que j'ai générées moi-même. Et c'est drôle, mais dans le monde virtuel, on a tellement l'habitude de prendre partout et de couper partout. Je me sens plus libre, mais en même temps, peut-être le résultat est moins le mien qu'avant.
Et la question qu'on pourrait poser, c'est est-ce que cette idée-là d'emprunter du code, d'emprunter des modèles, d'emprunter des frameworks de développement, est-ce que ça dilue un peu l'intention de l'auteur? Est-ce qu'au final, ça devient plus un travail collaboratif qui vient d'une communauté ou est-ce que vous trouvez que c'est juste un nouveau paradigme de mettre des éléments disparates ensemble?
Pour moi, je dirais que l'esthétique de l'Internet, c'est qui prend les sources de partout et qui fait quelque chose de nouveau. Et l'intertextualité est très importante pour moi dans l'esthétique de l'Internet. Alors, je pense, pour moi, je n'utilise pas beaucoup le collage dans mon pratique autre que ça. Mais je pense que c'est un bon fit pour ce projet. Et puis, je pense que ça donne une esthétique qui est différente que la mienne ou de Yasha, mais c'est comme une partie de l'exploration de la collaboration pour moi.
Excellent. C'est très intéressant. Je vous remercie. Je vous souhaite bonne chance dans la suite de votre projet. J'aime beaucoup l'esthétique, c'est un peu low-res, quirky, qui est très intéressante à mon avis. On va enchaîner avec la prochaine participante qui s'appelle Nadine Valsin. Donc, je vais la présenter. Nadine Valsin is an award-winning filmmaker and media artist based in Toronto. She is currently an MFA candidate in the Digital Futures program at OCAD University and holds a professional degree in architecture from McGill University. Nadine is the 2020-2021 Archive Counter-Archive Artist in Residence at Library and Archives Canada, while also developing an interactive documentary about the future of cities for the National Film Board of Canada. Donc, bonjour.
Bonjour, merci beaucoup. Attendez, je vais partager mon écran. Et voilà. Excusez-moi. Je vais activer le partage. Et voilà. Merci donc pour l'invitation. Je viens en fait tout juste de terminer ma maîtrise en médias numériques et nouvelles technologies à OCAD. Je vais donc faire la présentation en anglais, mais je vais être heureuse de répondre à vos questions en français. Ma présentation porte sur mon projet de thèse qui est intitulé Our Home and Haunted Land, a Meditation on Space, Memory and Virtual Reality. Puis je vais vous montrer un extrait.
It's beautiful here, isn't it? I used to live nearby once upon a time. My name is Therese. I'll be your guide for today's personalized tour of Takaranto on Turtle Island, or what some people commonly refer to as Toronto, Canada. This haunted land holds many secrets, and if you want to know, follow me and read my mind. I have some things to show.
Alors, avant d'aller plus loin, je vais prendre le temps de reconnaître le territoire sur lequel je travaille et qui a en partie inspiré mon projet. J'emprunte avec permission les mots de Darling Manning, une Anishinaabeg qui est membre de Kettle et Stony Point First Nations et aussi professeur à l'Université Queen's. Toronto, Takaranto is located on the ancestral homelands of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Huron-Wendat people. To occupy means to seize the land in the advancement of settler wealth at the expense of those who are withheld from the land. Toronto is Treaty 13 territory, also known as the Toronto Purchase, signed in 1787 by representatives of the Crown and a band of Anishinaabe, known today as the Mississaugas of the Credit. The treaty was under dispute for over 200 years. The Mississaugas understood that they were renting the land, not extinguishing their rights to it. The exchange was mainly in trade items, gun flints, brass kettles, mirrors, laced hats, and a bale of flowered flannel and rum. A land claims dispute was settled in 2010. Today, Toronto is the home to many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis, as well as other diverse community. I am grateful to the Indigenous people here and across Turtle Island for their hospitality, and am committed to working towards decolonial justice with them. Our Home and Haunted Land is a 10-minute linear virtual reality experience that examines the colonial histories embedded in the names of a number of Toronto spaces. It incorporates research creation, Afrofuturism, and decolonial methodologies to expose the violent legacies of the land we live on. The project uses VR to reinsert in our societal and physical space a simultaneously historical and futuristic Blackness in profound allyship with indigeneity. The project starts with a chance encounter in the summer of 2019 with an elderly gentleman from Guyana on the legendary Queen streetcar in Toronto. He asked me for the time, then sat down next to me and started recounting numerous stories related to the history of the street. He had worked in the trendy candy factory lofts when the building was still used to produce rocket candies. He had later found a job at a shoe factory a few blocks away in an industrial building that has since been torn down to make way for more condominium towers. Then we came to the Gladstone Hotel, and what he revealed about this Toronto landmark, which is barely 5 blocks away from my house, totally floored me. The hotel, built in 1889, is the largest continuously occupied hotel in the city. It is named, along with the adjacent street, after British Prime Minister William Gladstone, son of Sir John Gladstone, who, the elderly man revealed, was the largest slave owner, not only in his home country, but in the British Empire. This shocking fact led me to wonder why I didn't know about that history and what else is hidden in the names of the streets and the spaces that surround us. I began to think of the city as an archive where the streets and spaces that we habitually walk through and whose names invoke a certain geography are also permeated with historical allusions that roll off our tongue, even as we are unaware of what they refer to. In our home and haunted land, creating 3D photogrammetry scans of significant Toronto spaces and telling their colonial history using their names as a starting point was an opportunity to pursue a deep exploration of virtual 3D spaces and the way in which it can carry narrative. Thematically, the project is constructed around two axes. Indigenous history marked by the myth of European discovery, the dispossession of Indigenous land, as well as the genocidal project that sought to divest First Nations people of their culture. A Black history that challenges the myth of the recent arrival of the Black population, which is used to constantly negate Canada's strong relationship to the Black Atlantic. As an Afrofuturist narrative provides the frame for the story through the character of Thérèse, a time traveler emerging simultaneously from the past and the future to inhabit the contemporary present. She invites participants on a historical tour of the city, but also incites them to incorporate the knowledge they glean into a deep questioning of their position on the land. As a filmmaker and somebody who is trained as an architect, I'm interested in questions related to the affordances of immersion and storytelling in three-dimensional space and how it differs from content made for two-dimensional screens. The preoccupation in the project isn't with virtual reality as a means of recreating environments with verisimilitude, but rather to bring the concerns of experimental cinema and expanding upon them in three-dimensional space. It uses VR to point to what is visually absent rather than present. It immerses participants and invites them to look at spaces that they commonly see in a different manner, to question what has been omitted or erased from the communal memory. On a more technical level, the project is composed of an assemblage of photogrammetry scans rendered as point clouds, animations, and spatialized sound. The point clouds capture and render the sites around the city in ways that situate them between the real and the imagined, the familiar and the foreign. They embrace the aesthetic of the glitch as the scans remain imperfect representations of reality, emphasizing what is lost in the movement from the physical to the virtual. As much as I find their painterly nature of point clouds seductive, they also pose many challenges. Notably, different 3D software render them very differently, changing their appearance dramatically. They are also computationally heavy. What was originally conceived as a 6 degrees of freedom experience became a 360 video export because of the difficulty of live rendering for a headset. We also encountered numerous problems with the exports because of the size of the files. At this point, I consider the project to be at an early prototype phase. I received a grant from the City of Toronto to adapt it for large-scale exterior projection in early 2022. I'm also looking for somebody to write shaders and animate the point clouds. So if you are interested or know somebody who might be, please don't hesitate to get in contact with me. Merci.
Merci, that was very interesting. I really like the aesthetics of the point clouds. And before I ask you a question, I'd like to remind the viewers that the comments section is open for your own questions. And the question I have is there an aesthetic associated to the glitch? You talk about the glitch aesthetic. So does this aesthetic serve to put emphasis on urban spaces that recall colonialism? Is there a form of symbolism within the glitch, in your opinion?
Yes. I mean, I think at first, I guess I was really obsessed with the idea of cleaning the scans and making them like absolutely, perfect. And, and then I realized that that's not what the medium does. Like that's, the photogrammetry has all these artifacts and, it would take me, whatever, an hour or two to scan a building. So like there are cars passing by, there's that imperfection of things that are hidden behind other things that become visible when you're at another angle. I think, a lot of the projects about like the whole notion of haunting is really, it's about what's there, but you can't see. And the glitch is kind of opposite of like the imperfections that you can see, but that don't really exist. So I think there's an interesting tension between the two.
It is actually very interesting. And you talk about, that photogrammetry creates a liminal space between solid and void. So how does this ambiguity come into play in your work?
Well, I mean, it's been interesting, I think, because part of the challenge for me has been in the translations of the point clouds from one software to another. So I think in the slides that I showed at the beginning were the original point clouds, the way they were rendered either in Blender or Metasoft Agishape. And when I shifted to Unreal, I lost part of the finesse of the texture. So it kind of became something else, which I'm still struggling with. But I like the idea, originally I liked the idea of, the point clouds and when you're from far away, you can see the point clouds look solid, but the closer you get, the more you see the void between the points and the more, so I thought it was a great metaphor for the history that's there, but you can't see. So it's almost like the closer you get, the more it recedes.
And you use photogrammetry in VR, which are definitely, very high-tech tools to illustrate the remnants of colonialism, which is an issue that's been around for quite some time. So how do these tools make a difference compared to more traditional means of getting the message across?
I mean, I think I really like the idea of, using new technologies to get people to engage with content in different ways. And I thought it was really interesting to be able to immerse people in the state rather in the space rather than looking at a 2D screen, which is my normal media, and immersing them in this space that's at once familiar and foreign because it's kind of grounded in the photogrammetry, but it's not like a perfect, it takes buildings out of context and creates a new environment from it. So I thought it was an interesting way to engage.
Oh, there's a question. Hold on.
I think we have a final minute for another question from on the chat. How do you see the prototype being exhibited in the near future? Where would you like it to be exhibited?
Yeah, I mean, I would really like, the original idea was to have the point clouds be kind of slightly animated in the scenes and kind of, carry more kind of transformation from one space to another. So we're still looking to do that. And it's going to be adapted for 2D large scale projection on the waterfront in Toronto in 2022. So that will be different because a lot of the content from the prototype or from the VR experience is carried by the voice. So that voice will have to be translated in text. So I'm just really kind of thinking of how to take that 3D material and make something 2D out of it, which will be related, but also different.
That's great. We wish you lots of luck, and it's a very meaningful project. So I'm eager to see the rest. We have, sadly, I know there's other questions, but we need to move on. And I'd like to introduce our next speaker, donc Jean-François Robin. Jean-François Robin est un étudiant à la maîtrise en beaux-arts à Concordia. Il explore les points de tension entre le réel et le virtuel en s'inspirant des implications matérielles et conceptuelles de la physique quantique. Ses œuvres se concentrent autour des notions de perception sensorielle, de l'intraductible matériel et d'intra-action comme ontologiquement constitutives de l'être humain et le monde. Donc, je cède la parole à Jean-François Robin.
Bonjour à tous, merci Hexagram de m'inviter pour discuter de mon projet. Je voudrais parler de mon collègue avec qui je fais ce projet Mémoire du futur. Il n'a pas pu se joindre à nous aujourd'hui, donc je vais jouer un enregistrement de sa part. Mais d'abord, j'aimerais juste présenter sa pratique aussi pour que vous sachiez comment on se rencontre. Donc, quand moi j'étudie la relation entre les technologies et le vivant, en utilisant la science, lui, il va faire des marches, photographier le monde et s'intéresser comment le monde s'accumule, comment on crée des espaces, des villes, des lieux de vie où il y a mouvement, on détruit, on reconstruit, on respire dedans, on vit tout simplement. Lui, il a une pratique qui est plus traditionnelle, qui tire de la peinture, de la sculpture. Et en ce moment, il est à la maîtrise à Concordia en printmaking. Donc, le projet qu'on présente aujourd'hui s'appelle Mémoire du futur, en anglais Memories of the Future. C'est un projet qui se développe sur plusieurs médiums, pas seulement la vidéo. C'est des sculptures, c'est des prints et surtout un film en 5 chapitres. Aujourd'hui, vu que le temps est limité, on va se concentrer sur le film. Fait que je vais pas perdre de temps puis partager mon écran. Donnez-moi une seconde. OK. Fait que ce film-là, enfin ce projet-là, Mémoire du futur, on essaye de regarder le futur comme si c'était le passé. Dans le fond, parce que on pense que c'est plus facile de se dire c'était facile de faire ils auraient dû faire ça. Quand on regarde quelque chose de passé, on peut facilement analyser la situation puis se dire qu'on aurait pu faire autrement. Mais quand on regarde le futur, souvent il y a un blocage et on ne trouve pas des solutions, on n'a plus d'agentivité tout d'un coup. Fait qu'on essaye de regarder le futur de cette manière-là, dans l'espoir de recréer un peu des paysages nouveaux, des horizons où le rêve est capable d'exister. Attendez. Hop. Fait que ça c'est mon travail, enfin en tout cas une partie de mon travail, c'est un projet sur lequel je travaillais quand je rencontrais Amir, où là c'est un jeu vidéo qui en fait notre regard définit ce qu'on voit. C'est basé sur la théorie du principe d'observation de Niels Bohr, qui dit qu'en fait le fait d'observer fixe la réalité. C'est une simplification de sa théorie là, c'est sûr, mais moi j'ai transposé sa théorie qui est vraie à l'échelle quantique à l'échelle humaine. Je me suis demandé qu'est-ce qui se passerait si nous on regardait le monde et que les choses se fixaient sous notre regard. Fait que là c'est quelques images de l'exposition qui s'est passée à Concordia l'année dernière en décembre. Et ça c'est quelques peintures de Amir. Donc son travail c'est ça, il va prendre des photos, ensuite il va les travailler sur l'ordinateur. Et ensuite, il les retravaille à la main après les avoir imprimés, il peint par-dessus, etc., etc. Donc, il y avait beaucoup de connivence entre nos pratiques et on a essayé de trouver une manière de mélanger nos deux pratiques. Puis c'était très problématique au début, et vous allez voir pourquoi. Parce que on n'a pas des esthétiques très similaires en fin de compte. Je vais jouer l'enregistrement de Amir tout de suite. Faites-moi signe s'il y a un problème. Ah. Il semblerait que j'ai un problème technique, je ne suis pas capable de l'entendre. Excusez-moi pour ça, je vais devoir le faire moi-même. Donc, je vais parler de nos dessins initiaux. Donc, en fin de compte, en premier temps, Amir a créé des esquisses à partir de photos qu'il a travaillées, qu'il a imprimées, qu'il a printées manuellement. Donc, c'est des esthétiques un peu comme ça. Ensuite, il a travaillé aussi directement sur l'ordinateur, Photoshop, pour créer des sortes de paysages virtuels, une base pour nous, pour que je puisse ensuite travailler de manière autonome sur mes logiciels 3D. Donc, on voit ici quelques esquisses. Et donc, on est quand même très inspiré de tout l'univers des comic books, des films, mettons comme Tarkovsky, Stalker ou Sans Soleil ou des choses comme ça, 2001, l'Odyssée de l'espace. Mais on regarde ces films plutôt d'un point de vue esthétique. On n'essaye pas d'imaginer le futur comme une vérité scientifique probabilitique, que les choses vont se passer de telle ou telle manière. On est plus en train d'essayer de regarder comment on peut imaginer le futur et comment d'autres artistes devant nous l'ont fait et comment on peut emmener ça ailleurs, en tout cas, selon notre vision. Ensuite, je voudrais parler vite un peu de comment on travaille. C'est-à-dire que là, on a commencé, Amir faisait des esquisses pour le projet qu'on discutait ensemble. Et ensuite, moi, j'allais dans mes logiciels de création virtuelle, donc Houdini, Unity, puis genre je vais en passer parce qu'il y en a beaucoup d'autres. Et puis c'est ça, on crée des paysages qu'ensuite on importe dans divers logiciels. Mais ça peut aller vraiment dans plein d'éléments. Ça peut être des arbres, des roches. On crée vraiment beaucoup de détails, dépendamment si c'est nécessaire pour la narration ou si c'est important dans la composition. Est-ce qu'on le voit ou pas? Fait qu'on fait beaucoup d'essais, d'erreurs. Là, c'est par exemple des différentes versions qu'on a pu faire de créatures qui apparaissent dans le film. Donc, comme je le disais, le film est en 5 chapitres et chaque chapitre est différent. Chaque chapitre équivaut à un fragment de mémoire d'une personne qui serait vivante dans le futur ou qui aurait été vivante dans le futur à un moment donné. Et chaque personne est différente. Ce n'est pas les fragments d'une et même personne. Donc, on essaye de changer la notion de temporalité et la notion de perception à travers chaque fragment de mémoire. Aujourd'hui, ça ressemble plutôt à ça. Fait qu'on a des images fixes pour le moment. Tout de suite, je vais vous montrer une vidéo. Ça, c'est le chapitre qui s'appelle The Palace of Ruins. Donc, on a vu plutôt une vue de loin. Ici, c'est Through the Forest of Deception. Donc voilà, on travaille énormément la lumière et les environnements pour essayer de parler visuellement de nos idées, mais il faut savoir que ce que vous allez pas découvrir aujourd'hui, c'est la narration, c'est ce qu'il y a par-dessus l'image, c'est l'histoire qu'on raconte, parce que on trouvait que c'était pas suffisant de mettre des images sur des idées avec des images, mais qu'il fallait avoir un propos peut-être poétique ou en tout cas qui guide un peu la lecture chez le visiteur. Avant de montrer la vidéo, je voudrais expliquer quelque chose. C'est que ce projet-là, ça fait à peu près 2 ans qu'on travaille dessus. Il a été pensé pour exposer dans une galerie. Il n'a pas été pensé pour exposer en réalité virtuelle. Cependant, depuis la pandémie, on a été obligé de repenser un petit peu ça et finalement, on va l'adapter pour ça. Et je vais vous expliquer un petit peu plus tard comment et pourquoi. Tout de suite, je vais vous montrer une petite vidéo de 30 secondes d'un peu vers où on s'en va graphiquement pour ce projet. Voilà, c'était très court, mais c'est fini. Je vais passer à la suite. Fait initialement, c'est ça, on pensait à à présenter de manière physique dans un espace avec des objets, des impressions, des vidéos. Puis finalement, ça se fera sûrement un jour, mais on essaye en ce moment de chercher d'autres stratégies de déploiement. Puis notre approche, au lieu d'essayer de représenter une galerie qui existe réellement et c'est ça, d'essayer de reproduire vaguement et avec beaucoup d'erreurs la réalité, eh bien, on va essayer à la place de reprendre les ingrédients qui sont intéressants dans l'expérience réelle, qui est d'aller dans une galerie et qui nous donne des émotions, qui nous guide dans l'espace, qui nous fait ralentir, qui nous fait nous arrêter, qui nous fait regarder des éléments plus longtemps, qui nous fait réfléchir des fois. Et donc, on va essayer de trouver ces éléments-là, puis les mettre dans le monde virtuel qu'on va créer. Mais ce monde réel-là, comme je l'ai dit, il va pas être une copie de la réalité. Et finalement, ce qu'on fait avec les objets sculpturaux qu'il y a dans l'espace, c'est de prendre des éléments précis du film qu'on crée et de les déployer dans le réel. Et finalement, c'est ce qu'on va faire. On va le faire comme mélanger tous ces éléments-là qu'on a à travers tous les fragments de mémoire pour les mettre dans un espace virtuel, pour créer un espace virtuel, pardon. Fait que c'en est tout pour ma présentation. C'était un petit peu plus court que prévu. Mais voilà, si vous avez des questions, n'hésitez pas, et surtout si vous avez des suggestions à propos du déploiement dans l'espace, nous sommes très intéressés d'avoir vos avis.
Merci beaucoup. J'aurais une première question. C'est surtout au sujet du titre « Memories of the Future ». C'est quoi la motivation, c'est quoi les bienfaits d'appréhender le futur comme s'il s'agissait du passé?
Comme j'essaie de l'expliquer au début de ma présentation, c'est que c'est pour enlever une sorte de frein mental ou de crainte qu'on peut avoir quand on regarde le futur. Enfin, en donnant des cours à des étudiants au bac ou en faisant des présentations, je me suis assez rendu compte que comme l'imaginaire du futur est quand même peut être très sombre et peut faire peur, peut créer de l'anxiété. Puis nous, on cherche pas du tout ça. En fait, on cherche au contraire à créer des regards plus positifs ou à repermettre de rêver, surtout dans des contextes comme aujourd'hui, comme en ce moment. Et puis ça, c'est des mémoires du futur. Puis c'est par les mémoires qu'on reconstruit le futur. C'est en se souvenant le passé qu'on pense à ce qu'on va faire demain. Et c'est en présentant ces mémoires fictives, surréelles, qu'on essaye de penser le futur.
Merci. Je crois qu'il y a une question dans les commentaires.
Il y a une question dans les commentaires très simple, c'est à savoir en anglais, quel programme what engine is the film being rendered with?
Alors, on crée le contenu dans plein d'autres logiciels, mais au final, c'est tout dans Unity.
Tout simplement. Donc, merci beaucoup. C'est très intéressant. On va enchaîner avec le prochain présentateur parce que le temps file. Il s'agit de Pierre Chaumont. Pierre Chaumont vit et travaille à Montréal. Ses œuvres ont été diffusées dans une dizaine de pays à travers le monde, allant du Brésil au Japon, en passant par la Grèce, l'Allemagne et la Corée du Sud. Il fait partie, entre autres, des collections du Pratt Monson Williams Proctor Art Institute, du Musée d'art contemporain des Laurentides, du Musée d'art de l'Endava, de la New Art Library et de la collection L'Auto-Québec. Donc, bienvenue, Pierre Chaumont.
Bonjour, merci. Je vais partager mon écran. Donc d'abord, merci au Lab Mimesis, à Hexagram, Electra de me donner la chance de présenter Saucisse et Cannelle. On va commencer avec le titre. Aujourd'hui, je vous présente quelque chose qui va s'appeler Requiem pour un chien-chien ou Requiem for a Good Dog. Donc, depuis une centaine d'années, l'image des animaux a évolué, et surtout avec Internet. On peut penser à l'époque des dénominations de l'animal domestique comme quelque chose étant sous-humain, comme une vie de chien ou mouillé comme un chien. Et de nos jours, l'animal est devenu notre alter ego. Même le mythe de l'animal domestique est aussi vu d'une façon plus positive que nous, c'est-à-dire plus simple, plus pur, sans malice, plus proche de la nature et aussi plus serviable. La preuve, la photo à droite, c'est une photo de mon chien quand je lui ai dicté ce PowerPoint. Donc, l'apparition de cette image est en lien avec l'émergence d'un clash entre, d'un côté, la promesse positiviste héritée du modernisme en la technologie et le capitalisme computationnel qui en découle aujourd'hui. On pensait à la technologie comme un outil d'avancement et en fait, c'est devenu une arme de manipulation à des fins de profitabilité. Et quand je dis arme, c'est vraiment dans l'idée d'un objet ayant un impact sur un autre être humain, à la différence de l'outil qui, lui, est un objet ayant un impact sur un autre objet. Donc, la question, c'est comment utiliser cette arme pour renforcer l'implication sociale. Et la réponse est saucisse et cannelle, Loukanikos et Kanelos, ou encore les Riot Dogs. Mais qui sont ces deux êtres? Ce sont deux chiens qui, durant les manifestations anti-austérité de 2011 en Grèce, sont apparus et ont joint les protestataires. Vous voyez aussi à droite que Loukanikos a été nommé par le Time Magazine comme Person of the Year. Et voici des petites photos de Loukanikos au travail. Et c'est cet altruisme, cette présence et cette participation qui est une base de ce système. Mais, bon, en vrai, ça ressemble à quoi Loukanikos et Kanelos? Parce que ce n'est pas juste un NFT. Donc, c'est une installation qui utilise les théories d'autoperception et la réalité augmentée pour inciter le participant à s'impliquer socialement tout en lui donnant une base pour le faire. Mais d'abord, qu'est-ce que l'autoperception? C'est une discipline neurologique, enfin scientifique, qui s'intéresse à la perception de nous-mêmes en lien avec notre environnement. Un exemple simple, si moi, je joue à FIFA avec un avatar de moi-même ou de quelqu'un qui me ressemble, je vais avoir une croyance plus grande envers ma performance et je serai plus enclin à faire du sport. Et comme vous voyez à la droite, le résultat est extraordinaire. Donc, mais en vrai, là, ça marche comment? Tout d'abord, vous avez un participant qui entre et répond à un questionnaire à travers une tablette, qui prendra aussi une photo de ce même participant. Les réponses sont ensuite calculées et la photo est apposée sur un avatar dans un espace simulé en 3D qui est apposé sur un diorama que vous voyez ici, un diorama du Parlement grec et de ses alentours. Ensuite, la place de l'avatar est en lien avec leur implication sociale. Plus une personne s'implique socialement, plus proche des chiens elle sera. Donc, voilà. Et finalement, vous voyez ici, dans l'espace, ça ressemble à peu près à ça. Vous avez aussi un vidéo expliquant l'histoire de Loukanikos. Et à la fin, on offre une liste d'OBNL et d'ONG en lien avec les réponses qu'ils ont données pour inciter les gens à participer à leur communauté, bien sûr, comme je vous l'ai dit, en lien avec ce qu'ils font et ce qui les intéresse. Donc là, je vous présente une version un peu plus mise à jour de la 3D. Et je vais vous présenter un petit vidéo. Partager l'audio. Voilà. Hop, et voilà. Merci à vous. Si vous avez des questions, n'hésitez pas.
Donc, oui, merci beaucoup. L'esthétisme est vraiment intéressant. J'ai une question relativement simple pour commencer. Selon vous, c'est quoi le rôle des technologies numériques dans l'engagement social? Est-ce que il y a des gens qui disent que les outils numériques génèrent une nouvelle forme de militantisme, pendant qu'il y en a d'autres qui disent que c'est seulement un militantisme bénin et bien pensant qui ne demande pas nécessairement d'implication. Est-ce que les médias sociaux ont, selon vous, un rôle à jouer dans le militantisme et le changement social?
Les réseaux sociaux?
Ben, les technologies en général.
Ben, les technologies, oui, parce que bon, comme c'est un outil, enfin, les algorithmes sont un bon exemple de ça pour générer un profit pour les GAFAM, mais si on arrive à utiliser ou à produire, comme l'exemple de Luka Nikos, un algorithme ou un système qui pousse la participation sociale, oui, bien sûr que ça peut aider. Après, les réseaux sociaux, non, parce que les algorithmes en tant que tels font en sorte que le contenu qu'on veut, enfin qu'on consomme, est généralement le contenu qu'on veut voir. Donc, d'un côté, tout dépendant de l'outil qu'on va utiliser et qui fait l'outil, ça peut amener à un incitatif ou non.
OK. Et question aussi, en quoi les riot dogs, comme vous les appelez, constituent-ils un symbole de résistance? C'est pas ironique qui ait accédé à ce rôle malgré leur incompréhension des événements. Est-ce que c'est possible, selon vous, d'être accidentellement impliqué dans un mouvement de bouleversement social?
Oui, je pense qu'on peut être au milieu de tout ça indirectement, mais je pense que quand le chien est décédé en 2015 ou en 2016, des murales ont commencé à être faites pas loin du Parlement grec. Et je pense que c'est surtout le fait que ces animaux n'aient rien à gagner. Cette présence-là donne une certaine image enfin, en lien bien sûr avec le mythe de l'animal, mais donne une certaine, renforce cette pureté ou cette honnêteté qu'on impose à l'animal. C'est-à-dire que ces chiens-là sont devenus des icônes d'une manifestation qui ne les touchait pas, mais c'est par ce fait qu'ils sont devenus des icônes.
Et vous avez parlé aussi de vouloir de transformer cette œuvre-là en NFT. Est-ce que vous pouvez un peu élaborer sur ce sujet-là?
Bah, en fait, l'image que je vous ai montrée, c'est un NFT. Ça a été transformé en NFT pour le plaisir de le faire, mais ça marche. Enfin, c'est vraiment cette idée aussi de décentralisation et de réutilisation, d'utilisation d'un système pour changer la donne d'un système préexistant. C'est-à-dire que, bon, bien sûr, il y a plein de choses à dire sur les NFT, mais la question que ça pose, du moins dans le milieu de l'art, c'est le lien entre le marché de l'art et les acteurs de ce marché-là. Donc, faire un NFT, d'un côté, ça réduit cet espace, mais bon, il y a plein d'autres choses qui tombent après, comme les personnes, les collectionneurs, en tout cas, tout un niveau de spéculation qui est haut.
Excellent. Oui, je pense, parfait. Donc, merci beaucoup, Pierre Chaumont. Il y a une question qui vient d'être...
On peut la transmettre. En fait, Jules Deslandes pose la question, est-ce que vous voyez ce projet se déployer sur une plateforme numérique en ligne, multijoueur par exemple, et un follow-up question, où son essence participationnelle est plus pertinente dans un contexte d'exposition comme démontré dans vos dernières diapositives?
Ben, en fait, cette œuvre-là va être présentée dans des festivals en septembre et août. Ça pourrait être un jeu. C'est pas l'idée du jeu, en fait, change pas la nature de l'expérience. C'est-à-dire que de toute façon, notre propre image est insérée à cette simulation. Donc, ça pourrait être un jeu, ça pourrait être... après ça, bon, il faut faire le reste, mais ça peut très bien être un jeu et une installation en même temps. Ça pourrait être... oui, c'est ça. La possibilité, l'un n'empêche pas l'autre. Ça peut être un jeu, mais ça peut être aussi une œuvre plus traditionnelle.
Excellent. Donc, merci beaucoup, Pierre Chaumont. Donc, nous allons enchaîner avec notre prochain et le dernier participant, qui est Chris Salter. Donc, Chris Salter is an artist, professor of computation arts at Concordia University in Montreal, and co-director of the Hexagram Network for Research Creation in Media Arts, Design, Technology, and Digital Culture. Salter's performances, installations, research, and publications have been presented at numerous festivals, exhibitions, and conferences around the world. He is the author of Entangled and Alien Agency, both from MIT Press. He was creative consultant for the Barbican Center in London. His new book, Sensing Machines, How Sensors Shape Our Everyday Life, will appear from MIT Press in 2022. So let's welcome Chris Salter.
Thanks very much. Hold on one second. Shift this so we can see it. Thanks, Louis-Philippe. Je parle anglais pour ma conférence aujourd'hui. The talk is more of a provocation. Although at the end, I'm working on several projects with some of the technologies I'm going to talk about, but I'll only very briefly talk about one project in particular toward the end of the talk. So it's less of an artist talk and more of, let's say, a challenge to the emerging world that we're currently in. So some of you out there may know this image, but if you don't, it's perhaps the first working version of a head-mounted display coming from 1968. It's Ivan Sutherland's, quote, head-mounted three-dimensional display. It was developed at the University of Utah in 1968. If you don't know, Ivan Sutherland is one of the pioneers of computer graphics research in the 1960s, developed one of the first sketching systems for computer graphics, and is seen as one of the progenitors for augmented and virtual reality. Now, this setup looks really complicated, and it was so large and complex and heavy that it was dubbed the Sword of Damocles. And if you don't know who Damocles was a figure in Greek mythology who tried to earn favors with Dionysus, who was a tyrant ruler of Syracuse. And he was seated at Dionysus' throne, and he had a sword suspended above his head by a single hair, which demonstrated their kind of very complex and perilous relationship with Damocles and Dionysus in terms of power. Now, so this is a very precarious system you're looking at right here. It actually weighed about a ton or so, hanging from the ceiling. It was really complicated. It had 6 different parts. A clipping divider, had a matrix multiplier, a vector generator. These are all separate units in the computing system. It had a headset, it had a head position sensor, and it also had a computer attached to it. I can't even imagine such a monstrous thing today. Now, it was conceived and researched while at Harvard and at MIT's Lincoln Laboratory in the mid-1960s. So Sutherland was first at Harvard before he went to the University of Utah and founded the Computer Graphics Center there, of which many of his students ended up starting companies like Pixar, as well as Adobe, and on and on. Now, a Sutherland system was the first imagined for a completely different purpose than we think of today for augmented reality or extended reality. Let's call it the XR umbrella. It was actually meant to extend research from a project on night vision that Sutherland had seen when he visited a military contractor named Bell Helicopter. There's actually, if you go to Laval here in Montreal, you'll see a subsidiary of Bell Helicopter there. They still make helicopters mainly for military purposes. Now, Bell Helicopter was based in Fort Worth, Texas, and they were trying to figure out how to land helicopters in the dark. And so what they did was they essentially attached an infrared camera to the bottom of the helicopter and then had a small display for the pilot to see where they actually were. So there was kind of an extension of vision there. Now, Sutherland went to visit Bell Helicopter as he was developing this giant display system. And this system was actually funded by a range of government and industry sources. It was funded by the CIA. It was funded by ARPA, which of course many of you know was also the funder of the internet, the Advanced Research Projects Agency of the Pentagon. It was funded by the US Air Force, and it was funded, as I said, by Bell Helicopter itself. And this HMD sought to do something very specifically. And what he wanted to do was to immerse an individual in a synthetic environment by substituting a computer-generated image for a real image. And originally in the Bell Helicopter sense, the real image was provided by a camera, but Sutherland wanted to go beyond that. He wanted to surround the user with displayed three-dimensional information. And by precisely measuring the head position of the wearer of this device, in order to surround that user with that information, Sutherland's device would basically create a simulated equivalent of a real visual scene that would update based on the perceiver's head position. Okay. Now, Sutherland's system also tried to do something else, using computationally generated images for vision and overlaying them onto the real world, and also these ultrasonic head positioning sensors for the sensory motor system. He wanted to essentially reconfigure the way in which presence occurred by way of a technological system. So in other words, there was an interest in reconfiguring the human senses based on technology. Now, these Bell Helicopter experiments are very hard to find information on. They were classified because they were military funded experiments, but they're very, very interesting. We don't have a visual record of them, but what they involved were cameras that were hung in various places outside a building. So one of them was a camera was on the roof, and then inside the building, the user would be looking at this camera view using a pair of goggles, all right? Now, they set in motion a kind of very interesting optical and proprioceptive disjunction between the physical user or wearer of these glasses in the building and what was going on outside the building. So for instance, one experiment was there was a camera on the roof and two people were playing a game of ball. And as they threw the ball between each other, the camera caught this going on. And suddenly what would happen is one of the participants would throw the ball directly at the camera. Well, what would happen is the individual inside the building watching this would jump back because they thought the ball was actually coming directly at them. It reminds you of the early days of cinema, in fact, where people thought the trains from the Lumiere brothers films were coming out of the screen. Now, the other example involved hanging a camera off of a ledge and having a slight imbalance on the wooden plank they hung it on. And so the minute someone would come up and look in the goggles and see this, this view of the ledge with this slight motion, they would feel like they were falling themselves. So there was a strange sense of a kind of simulated vertigo from actually the real world going on outside of people's, these users' perception. Now, in '65, Sutherland wrote, which again, many of you might know, a famous manifesto called The Ultimate Display. And it's if you haven't read it, it's worth reading, especially for those of you working on extended reality systems. It's a fascinating combination between science and science fiction, like much computer like visions of the 1960s were. And I'm going to read just the first paragraph where he basically says We live in a physical world whose properties we have come to know well through long familiarity. We sense an involvement in this world, which gives us the ability to predict its properties well. For example, we can predict where objects will fall, how well they'll fall from different angles, and how much force is required to push objects against friction. So Bethany says a display connected to a digital computer gives us a chance to gain familiarity with concepts not realizable in the physical world. It is a looking glass into a mathematical wonderland. And basically what Sutherland at the end of the article says is we can have essentially this ultimate display which will allow us to create the wonderland in which Alice walked. This is, of course, a reference to Lewis Carroll, Alice in Wonderland. Now, although this was focused on vision, these systems, Sutherland also actually said that he wanted to serve as many senses as possible. Okay, so there was this idea that even though these technologies were visual based, we wanted to serve as many senses as we could serve at the time. Now, there's a couple problems here with how Sutherland's ideas, and they seem at first to relate strictly to vision, have come to pass 50 years later, some more than 50 years later, actually. So the first is the fact that these critical positions around the disjunction of the senses have been kind of washed away by the frenzy around VR. Now, this is, of course, the coordinate system that Sutherland developed. Now, this image, I'm sure you've all seen, it's quite telling. Now, part of this has been the kind of hype that virtual reality has received since Kickstarter's Oculus startup was acquired by Facebook for $2 billion in 2014. Now, like many stories of techno-scientific transformation that emerged from Silicon Valley, these stories of VR, if you read them, any kind of textbook on VR or any kind of popular manual, constantly repeat the same myths. First of all, they propagate the myth that VR essentially had no military history, which, as I'm trying to show you, is not the case. This might show that again in a more recent, this is 2021 in March, or XR, if we put it that way. Also, the myth of Silicon Valley is that every technology that's been developed is going to help mankind, is progressive. There's, of course, an imperial myth that everything was invented in Silicon Valley that has to do with technology. And finally, of course, there's the myth of VR as a, or let's say XR as a panacea for real reality. This is a really interesting way of thinking about how Zuckerberg basically said that, quote, when we run up against the limits of reality, VR is going to make our lives and our own reality much, much better. So I like this idea of running against the limits of reality. Now, there's a paradox here. So despite this overemphasis on creating never before imagined worlds that have their own physics and cosmologies, current VR technology seems very, very human in some strange sense, because what it's trying to do is now integrate its users' bodies directly into these simulated worlds. So there's this emphasis now, which is very different than the early days of virtual reality in the 1960s, but then the kind of second wave of the 1980s and 1990s with companies like Telepresence or VPL, also running out of California, is this focus now on full body presence. We really want this idea that people are actually as embodied as they can be in this kind of simulated worlds. And this fits very much nicely in our kind of experience economies now, in which the body is the last place that capitalism can actually land and take over. Now, the second problem is the following. So the reality we've run against is the pandemic, right? And there's a lot of perceptual shifts that have occurred. So how have we dealt with this? Well, so this is a kind of vision of Facebook, social virtual reality. And this is, of course, another kind of vision of collective shared virtual reality. As you can see, another kind of interesting myth that's constructed. And this is, of course, the reality we're in now, which is very, very flat. And in fact, so I'm going to call this a kind of flatness. We're living in a world of flatness. Now, this term flatness is interesting because flatness reveals three different, let's say, contexts. The first is this notion of flatness. This is ukiyo-e, which is called the floating world. It was essentially a Japanese painting style from the mid 1600s up to the mid 1800s in the Edo period of let's say, early modern Japan. And this is a very non-dimensional style of art. It's very flat, literally, like it doesn't have any dimensionality to it. It's not attempting to show you there's a 3D world of XYZ axis. It's really very, very kind of at the surface flat. Now, the other reference is to Takashi Murakami, who you might also know, who coined the term superflat. And Murakami's work, of course, is very, very famous. He studied actually these floating world paintings in his PhD work, but he's interested in this kind of cartoon flatness of animation. And also the word super flat refers to the flatness of the consumer world, okay? Now, but flatness has another aspect of our contemporary condition, and it's this flat. It's the Zoom flatness. And it's essentially video conferencing. So think about this for a second. I'm going to give you a quote. The video conferencing worldwide market size is projected to reach $10.9 billion by 2027, with a compound annual growth rate of 9.7% during 20 to 27 alone. And on Monday, this was in March, Zoom Video Communications reported its fourth quarter earnings from the end of 2020, up 370%. Okay. Now, the video conferencing market is continuing to boom and will continue to boom, but it implies a new kind of bodily state of conditions for us. If you go back to Sutherland and thinking about his idea that this augmented or extended reality would appeal to the senses and to allow people to navigate inside these kinds of new spaces, which are overlaid onto the real world, we're in a really different place. There's a very interesting study that came out from a Stanford psychologist at the end of last year called Nonverbal Overload, a theoretical argument for the causes of Zoom fatigue. Now, you've heard about Zoom fatigue, and if you haven't read about it, you experience it probably every day. This author basically points out 4 possible explanations for Zoom fatigue: excessive amounts of close-up eye gaze, cognitive load, increased self-evaluation from staring at video of oneself, and more importantly, constraints on physical mobility. Right now, I'm very constrained because I'm talking to you in front of this camera because I can't carry around 2 machines, one that has my text and one that has the image that's being projected on Zoom. Now, there are 2 aspects of this study that are important and bear some description. The first is the loss of co-presence among us. He says, one of the challenges of virtual meetings is that nonverbal cues are difficult to send and receive, causing cognitive overload. Although video conferencing offers the ability to visibly communicate nonverbal cues, one of the authors of the study points out that, quote, users need to work harder to send and receive signals. So this is interesting. We tend to think this is a normal situation that we're sitting in front of these screens, but we're losing a lot of specific nonverbal information that's very relevant in physical not present situations, which are being, let's say, reduced in these situations. The other stressor, Zoom draining your energy, but the other stressor is mobility, and this is the kind of toward the end of my talk. Just basically say is that during face-to-face, this is a quote again from this Stanford article. During face-to-face meetings, people move, they pace. They stand up, they stretch, they doodle on a notepad, they get up to use a chalkboard, they even walk over to the water cooler to refill their glass. There are a number of studies showing that locomotion and other movements cause better performance in meetings. For example, people who are walking, even when it's indoors, come up with more creative ideas than people when they are sitting. Okay. Much of the studies show that a casual relationship, for instance, children are required to gesture with their hands while learning math, showed more learning retention compared to a control group. So essentially, while Zoom, doesn't technically prevent you from sitting or raising your hand, what it does do is reduce the amount of movement that your entire body makes. Okay, so now if I stand up and I start to walk around in the space, my text is over there, but how many of you are usually doing Zoom talks walking around, which basically you're supposed to be moving every 15 minutes, okay? All right, now just to conclude, this is the life we're in right now, right? So this is not only the world of flatness, it's also a very, very interesting world of staring at ourselves all the time. So now that we've run up against the limits of reality, this is as Zuckerberg tried to imply, where is all this technology? Where is all this extended reality technology that's supposed to make our reality much better? Where is it? Why have we actually given into this flatness of current conditions? Why do we continually replay this myth of this Greek white myth of Narcissus all the time, every day in and day out for the last year? Why do we subject ourselves to this kind of Zoom exhaustion? Okay, where is all this research that from 1968 onwards that was supposed to transform the sensorial world into a world of telepresence and the sense of people being in the same room with you? Why have we gone to this loss of senses, essentially? And so now let me just jump to the end here. So this is the ultimate display of 2021. This is a pair of Nreal mixed reality glasses that goes beyond the paradigm of this, which is what's currently called augmented reality. You can see what it's really focused on, making sure you have the right table or chair when you go to IKEA. But what's very interesting is that with these Nreal glasses, you start to bring in something slightly different. Now, there's something else called Magic Leap, which I'll show you in a second. These are so-called augmented reality or mixed reality technologies that suggest another kind of paradigm. They suggest what's called spatial computing. The spatial computing idea is that the real physical world, that's not just in front of us on a screen, but actually the thing we walk through, that we survive as human beings going all the way back to hunter-gatherer states, is in fact the space that we should actually be exploring and understanding more and more. I'm going to show you a very quick thing that we've been working on. So this is a project coming out of a collaboration with Gamlere, Williwan, and Berpiri, indigenous artists from Australia called RE, who I've been working with now in a project, group project for a number of years. This was originally supposed to be a very large-scale immersive installation. We were working on it in 2020 when the pandemic hit. This is video of actually the physical space that we were originally playing with, of projecting onto these surfaces. This is a project dealing with shape-shifting and transformation in Rees Country, which is in New South Wales. And of course, the pandemic came, and so everything stopped. The idea of, as Daniel was saying earlier, like immersive things in public space or even immersive things in private space are very, very difficult to think through. So now we're kind of playing around with Magic Leap. And the interesting thing about Magic Leap is to show you an image that's taken from the camera of the Magic Leap. So what you're seeing is video that is actually in the real space. So this is not a projection. This is only projected in front of your eyes. But in fact, as I'm walking, you actually kind of see that I'm walking around this image, which is actually not there. It's in my vision, and it's also, in terms of the acoustic space, it's also acoustically, it's in 3D, but it's binaural audio. But what's really interesting is that I have to actually move around this image. I have to understand that this is not a screen that's flat on a wall or a screen that's on my phone, that I'm actually having to be locomotive, that I'm going to have to change the position of my body like we have to do when we listen to things. We move toward things in order to hear them. They don't come to us in order for us to hear them. And what's really very interesting here is that this constant notion of bodily transformation, which is played out with this dancer and this kangaroo as this kind of shape-shifting experience that's in this story that Ria's developed, and this experience, puts us in a different physical space. It puts us in a way that actually our bodies do count, that screens, displays are things that are culturally constructed and not given, and that we start to be able to question those kinds of things. So I guess the thing I want to leave you with is a provocation, as opposed to spending all the research dollars we have on trying to develop better streaming systems that will accommodate us in the pandemic, which is continuing now, but the next one may come very soon. This leads to what Simon Penny called the kind of sensory debility, in which we're losing sensory motor skills and dexterity and a whole range of senses beside seeing. Why don't we start to try to rethink our relationship with these screens, and to think about what communication could be within a world which is not flat. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Chris. That was Wow, food for thought. Very, very interesting. And I'd like to remind everyone that you can ask questions in the comments, but I've got a few questions myself. And so if I understand correctly, the problem we have is that the media environment we're living in right now, the social environment, is related to flatness. So Zoom is a very flat experience, and it sort of discards a lot of the perceptual and sensory aspect of day-to-day interaction with other people. So I guess the stopgap solution for that would be solutions like a VR or other types of spatial computing. But the thing is, since VR in a large part is owned by companies such as Facebook, how do you feel about letting our virtual space letting it be in the hands of companies like Facebook, if they've got so much power over, let's say, the social space? If you add virtual space on top of that, that allows them to yield a lot of power. Don't you find that scary?
Yeah, it's a huge problem, and it's very interesting because in augmented reality, the worn augmented reality context, everyone's waiting for two companies to release augmented reality glasses. One is Facebook and one is Apple. You know, two of the 5 companies which now account for about 22% of the GDP of the entire United States, which is terrifying in and of itself. And it's really, and of course, I showed Magic Leap, which was a company which was funded by Silicon Valley money for a long time, which kind of is still around, but its hype didn't, the technology it developed was kind of way ahead of the perceptual way of people thinking about this. I mean, we're so unused to thinking about things that were in which digital things are there, but there's no screen to hold them. You know, this is so kind of just like, as I said, the early days of cinema, people didn't imagine that actually the screen was reproducing an image. They thought that actually what was there was real. And we're going to go through a very similar period, I think, as these technologies, as these spatial computing technologies start to emerge, in which we're actually going to have to deal with the physical world. VR is very convenient in the way that we can just ignore the physical world. I mean, yes, now we have wireless VR with Oculus, Quest, and so we're free, we're non-tethered. But in fact, the interesting thing is that the world that's there is still a world which is blanked out. You know, so you forget that the world from your neck down even really exists, even though there's an attempt to keep it moving. So I think one antidote to that, or one counter, is that things that, as Nadine, for instance, was showing earlier, is that works are developed with these technologies that try to decolonize them or try to critique them, because as you were saying, Louis-Philippe, is that the amount of power behind these perceptual technologies which are emerging now, which are actually utilizing all sorts of ideas from the 19th century in terms of how we monitor and how we quantify human sense perception. Those ideas didn't die in the 19th century. They're actually being used right now in Facebook Reality Labs to develop these kinds of new HMDs that Facebook is going to sell and want us to live in all the time. So, you know, this tension is going to become more and more apparent between what constitutes the physical world, the embodied physical world, and what constitutes this display world. And it bears reference to go back and look at what Sutherland said, because there was always an idea of kind of overlaying things to try to understand something about that physical world, versus now where we may live 24/7 in that space.
Which is somewhat of a scary prospect.
Well, some people would like to live in Facebook 24/7, you know, and this will accommodate them very much.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure I want to live in that kind of reality, but I think we've got a question, yes, on the comments.
On the comments, yeah, from Yann Breleux. So asking, I guess, thinking about these perhaps more haptic or other forms of engaging presence. Do you see a future to create more eye contact? Yes, a direct communication in Zoom or any other technologies or kind of display. The question is, do you see a future to create more eye contact?
I think eye contact is the problem right now. It's more like, do we see a future to create more non-eye contact, more body contact? If you go back and look at people like Edward Hall in the 60s, who was talking about the notion of proxemics, which is, interestingly enough, is coming up now in all sorts of robotics research, because again, reinventing the wheel always. Proxemics was about how different cultures relate to space. We assume, for instance, the thing of what these technologies do in terms of flatness is not just flatten the visual, the perceptual world into screens or into flat surfaces, but they also flatten the cultural understandings of space, because not all cultures, as Hall pointed out, actually see and experience space the same way. And so again, these technologies are trying always to create a kind of neutral understanding of things like space or time that are very, very culturally specific. And you just have to go back and look at some of the work that's been done in sociology and anthropology about how we perceive those things. So how then do we take these tools and these emerging technologies and shape them in very specific cultural ways, as opposed to treating them as flat in that other sense, which is neutral and homogeneous.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Chris. I think your final presentation really came full circle with the initial presentation by Daniel Iregui, and namely you mentioned at the end to this l'image de Narcisse and the image, how can we create a world where we're less looking at ourselves, at our own faces in this very, very flat screen. So it really brings us full circle, and it's ideal to wrap up our session because it's exactly 2 p.m. And I just want to thank everyone, all the presenters today, and thank everyone that came online to attend, and invite you to the next one in 2 weeks on May 27th. The invited expert will be Alain Thibault, focusing on the theme of diffusion, so dissemination. Today was creation, and the last session on June 10th, focusing on exhibition with Myriam Achard and Daniel Fizet from FI Center. So thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, and see you again in 2 weeks.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everybody, for all your presentations.
Thanks. Bye.